Yeah, there we go. All right. So for some context, I am working on porting over the Helm release code from using locally cloned Git repositories to using the API. But the Helm release process is quite different from the rest. It's like many files that need to be updated, and I kind of notice I kind of lack, I think, a certain amount of context and knowledge of the sort of underlying system and goals, which kind of leads to cases where I look, for example, at the existing code and I see what it does, I see what the result is, but it's not entirely clear sort of how it gets there, what it's supposed to do, and in particular cases where, for example, I look at a commit that bumps the version, that shows me what happens when we bump that version, but it doesn't show me what may in certain cases also need to happen, but didn't happen in that particular case. Now for that, I have a bunch of questions. Some of them are fairly open-ended, but hopefully after that, I have a bit of a better understanding of how this works and how we can implement this in the API. Let me write down the questions in a comment right away, so I can just add the answers there. Open Vim, markdown. Let's see. So the first question is, how does the distribution team currently run Helm releases? Because we have support for running this from a CLI using these scripts in the charge repo, but we also have ChatOps, and theoretically, I think you could trigger release tools to do it, because that's what ChatOps does. But I'm kind of curious what the release tools team, the distribution team uses, if that's both CLI and ChatOps, or just ChatOps, or only the CLI.
I don't think we have direct access to ChatOps in that regard. We are actually just manually running the job as documented for release tools.
Oh, right. Okay. That's interesting, because I think you should have access, but you should may not have ChatOps access. Okay. Well, that's easy enough. And in those cases, version does. So the charts release process, it supports, as far as I could tell, input being either a Helm chart version or a GitLab Rails version. And when one is given, it will try to infer the other based on a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm kind of curious, does the distribution team usually specify one of these versions, or just always both? Or so what is the input there in most cases, basically?
Well, as the document currently stands, you normally, if you just need to bump the version, we literally just tell it to bump the version of the chart itself, and it will bump just the version of the chart and not change anything else. You can specify both, and at some point you had to specify both because there was a bug in release tools wherein it was supposed to take either one argument or the other and figure it out, but it failed to do that. So you had to specify the chart version and the GitLab version. In the end, I think I almost always just pass both to be explicit out of habit.
All right. So when you, at least when distribution bumps just the chart version, because I think there is a certain code path where you can leave out the version entirely, and it sort of tries to figure out the last one is and bumps that. Does distribution, when just bumping the Helm charts, do they figure out what the next version is going to be themselves and then pass that in? or just not specify any and let Helm or let the release code figure it out?
So we haven't had to do this in some time, but when we do it, it's usually we know that we're going from, say, 4.3.0 to 4.3.1 to fix a bug that's chart local, right? So similar to how the omnibus has, EE.1,
Right.
right? We explicitly say 4.3.1 because we actually just know what the next patch version is.
Right. Yeah, the context they're asking is because in release tools there's this code for finding the corresponding Helm version given a GitLab version, which, as far as I understand, is used when we release a new version of GitLab. I believe we pass it the GitLab version, then it figures out what the Helm version is. So it's kind of curious, sort of what input distribution gives to see, do we actually need that or do we need something else? But it seems, yeah, for now we have to basically keep that. Let's see.
Right. There's a certain amount that just has to be there.
Let's see. This is a more open-ended question. So what I notice is when we run the release, we take these chart YAML files and we there's an app version field, which is for the GitLab version, and then I believe there's just a version field for the chart version. As part of release, is that all that needs to be updated, or are there, in certain cases, perhaps certain other things that need to be updated or generated or whatever?
There is the actual mapping table. So
right.
that gets updated, and that process is primarily fully automated. Other than that, the changelog integration is a part of that behavior. So I believe that's common across multiple projects at this point. So that when you go to run the tag, in most other pieces, the known dependencies are already version locked.
Right.
With the chart, we have to update it across all the things because we're intentionally running our master on master of all the projects,
Right.
because that allows upstream review apps to consume it directly and know that their version will be whatever their version is. And it also lets us very quickly test, oh, nope, that's a breaking change for Italy. Don't do that. So that is one distinct difference, is in the GitLab code base. The version of Italy doesn't get automatically updated. Somebody actually has to go say, I now want you to ship this version of Italy. Whereas we go, you have to tell me the version you want.
Right. Okay, but so it's basically just app version, the version field, the markdown table, and the changelogs, and that's it. Okay, because that's kind of thing, like when I look at these commits, that's what I see happening. But it kind of begs the question, like, okay, are there certain cases where, I know, perhaps for a major version, we also need to do this? That, that clears it up. Let's see. Do the git tags need to be annotated just like Omnibus, or does that not matter? Because that's what I found out.
It would not hurt.
Right.
They're not, but it wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, because that's what I ran in last week with Omnibus. We swapped over to the API code, ran the whole release, and then I found out that somewhere in the depths of release tools, we create annotated tags for Omnibus, because otherwise Omnibus will create a pipeline, but the pipeline will error because it cannot find the commit for the tag, I believe. And so then we had to retag, which is a bit of a pain. But if Helm doesn't need it, I think I'll just create annotate tags because it's easy enough. Let's see. The next one. So I noticed that in the version managing code, we have this concept of, I think it's called build metadata. At least we have this logic in the chart repo where it tries to figure out between two given versions what changed and whether it's a major, minor, patch, increment, etc. And in there, it supports this notion of a build metadata change. Now, I can't actually find where that is actually used. If anywhere, let me quickly. No,
That
it
is
doesn't actually.
most definitely a auto deploy branch thing. So when
Yeah,
they
so
cut their tags, that's where that comes in.
right. So DJ linked me to a merge request from Alessio where he added that. And so I see the logic as in like it detects like, oh, hey, this is a build metadata change, but we don't actually ever seem to act upon it. So this code where you say, oh, hey, if the app changes a major version, do this. It seems that in all this case, the fallback is to just keep the chart version as it is, in case of metadata. And so it's never explicitly handled anywhere, which to me raised the question like, okay, do we need to somehow port this over to the API? Because it appears that although we might stuff it in the actual version, we don't actually do anything with it as part of the version bumping process.
Right. And I don't know exactly off the top of my head how it's being used by the auto deploy pipeline behaviors. I have to go study it myself, to be honest. It's one of those things where our official tags are never going to have the build metadata. It's not non-compliant with Semver in any way, shape, or form, but it's not our practice to do that.
Right.
Across any of our projects, to do that on a public final release tag is to include the metadata. So in that particular aspect, I don't feel that we necessarily need it. However, it is an actively consumed component of the auto deploy pipes.
Yeah, so I mean, including it in the version is fine. It's just more like, do we need to do anything with it beyond that in our release tools? But seems we don't. Includes what is in versions. These tools will use itself. Okay, let's see. Oops. This is a question to which I already know the answer, but just to double check. Does Helm run build pipelines for tags that are pushed, similar to Omnibus?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's also a case where we were committing version bumps with a CI skip tag in it. And then Omnibus, when you push the tag, refuses to run pipelines because the tag committed CI skip. That
would be a whoopsie, yeah.
Yeah.
So currently we do CI skip, and then a commit. So like there's multiple, and there is the first ones are CI skip, and then the commit that is tagged is actually the one that actually doesn't have that, thus trips.
Right. Okay. Let's see. There's a question like how the Helm auto deploys work, but I think I kind of already. Yeah, that's maybe just for the sake of it. So, do the Helm auto deploys work kind of similar to Omnibus, where we create this gigantic tag basically, and then Helm just builds stuff, and that's it? At least that's my understanding in terms of what it does.
Effectively.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a mix of things that's going on there. I don't. John, do we actually deploy a tag, like by chart, or are you all doing a direct pull for that one?
A direct pull. We specify a SHA because we're always ahead of what the auto deploy or the release actually is in GitLab.com.
That's what I thought. So I don't believe we publish an actual release artifact of the Helm chart anywhere. So I know that we were doing explorations because prod uses, I should say, infrastructure uses Helm file as opposed to Helm directly at this point in time. And the trick was how to do Helm sources from Git versus literally doing Git clone and run. But as far as I know, right now they're operating literally check out the SHA run. And I think the tags are specifically related to that pattern.
Right.
John, could you tell me what the metadata SHA is inside of the auto DevOps tag?
It's been a while, but I think the only thing we have included in there is the SHA of the GitLab product, not of Helm at all, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I looked at it.
That's what I thought. It's more like I'm just trying to remember, see if you remember any different. It's been a little while since I've had to deal with the auto deploys specifically.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we weren't including the omnibus SHA because, you know, that doesn't make any sense. So I think we just dropped it when it was implemented. But Yorick, you and I would have to go through our code just to validate that again.
Right. You might include the CNG SHA.
I don't think so.
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, I don't know if you do include it or if you might be something you want to do, because when you're doing the auto deploy from the omnibus, you're including the omnibus SHA and the point in the GitLab repository. Right. The comparative equal would be the GitLab SHA and the CNG SHA, so that you have the 2 points in time. This is the code base, and this is the build of the containers, and then your tag is the chart that deploys this version of the containers that contain this version of the application. So it's, but
yeah, it's kind of, I'm trying to, I couldn't quite figure out from Leastal sort of where we specify the tag names and everything, but I'll figure that out. Let's see. So those are the questions that I had written down. Let me get rid of this. Let's see. Yeah, I think that was more or less all that came to mind. Which so far is quite helpful because it kind of confirmed my suspicions that the release process is perhaps not nearly as complex as the code that we use for it. Because when I look at the code, it's like, oh wow, we have all these different things going on. What on earth are we doing? But it seems that the actual process is fairly straightforward, as in find a bunch of these chart YAML files, bump some versions, and that's basically it.
Pretty much. You just have to bump all the associated versions so that the right ones come across. And then
yeah, so that's maybe an next really good question. Let's say so because I believe we have separate chart files for Rails and Sidekick, as far as I understand it. Let me double check that.
Correct.
Sidekick chart, yeah.
One is web service that contains the Puma server. Right now, there's no difference between whether it's a web or an API. Effectively, assume every component operates entirely separately.
Right. That does bring a good question. Like, let's say we release a new version of GitLab. How would it know that it would have to, for example, update these Sidekick and web service YAML files? Is there like somewhere a YAML file that says, oh, GitLab is really split into these files, or that's
so
something
that actually ties back to the CNG. So the way it works out is if it bases it off of app version to whatever the tagged aligned image is from the CNG. So if you set sidekick to 13.5.6, it will assume that you mean that it will look for the container if EE or CE, and then look for the tag of v13.5.6 first. You can override that manually as part of the chart, but the assumption is that the app version for all of the GitLab controlled charts aligns to the exact tag as output from the CNG.
Right. Let's see, there's a question as to where we sort of pull that info.
Right now, that information isn't actually directly pulled.
No, so what I mean, for example, if I look at the manage version script, when it's not entirely clear to me where it figures out, oh, hey, we have GitLab version this, so we need to update, you know, Sidekick, web service, etc. It seems to just, I wouldn't be surprised if it just always updates them in the sense that, oh, there is a GitLab version. So then we just set all chart files that have an app version field to this new version. Although that's kind of
Effectively, yes.
Right.
Because most of the application containers, the output application containers, are actually based on the tag of the CNG. So when you tag the CNG, you're generating all of the application containers to actually be effectively GitLab version 13.5.6. Right. And so the GitLab charts are designed to consume based off the GitLab version, and the GitLab version comes from GitLab or GitLab, which contains the specifically known versions of the actual applications under which. Right. So right now, the single source of truth of the version of Gitly that you're supposed to get is from the GitLab or GitLab repository itself.
Right. So in case of, for example, Gitly, is the app version field, I could probably check that in the repo, but is the app version field, is that the version of GitLab Rails or the version of Gitly? I would imagine it would be the version of Gitly, right? So if it's, say, for example, we release Gitly has version, let's say 4.0, and we release GitLab 10.0, does for Gitly the app version in the chart file get set to 4.0 or 10.0?
So for example, I'm looking at the 4.3 stable branch right now, and we actually have it set. The current stable tag is 4.3.1, which aligns to GitLab 13.3.1. Right. That's the tag that we have. So that's the version of the image from the CNG it expects.
Can you send me a link to that? I can add that to my notes. Oh. Wait. Where did you send it?
I mistyped the URL because I was going to take it and just drop it into the chat. Sorry. Okay, I'm just going to nav to the URL because, yeah, apparently type in the URL. It just doesn't like me today. There you go, Zoom chat.
Let's see. Copy paste. Let's see. Gitly app version. Okay, so app version is just the Rails version. That's a little funny, but such as Gitly, this is also the Rails version.
And that stems specifically because the Rails version is what is actually tagged on the CNG, and then the images are all tagged to align that.
Right, okay. Well, I'm guessing, actually. I'm curious, because I think Gitly operates in lockstep. Yeah, so that might
Yeah, it does
be,
now.
Let's see. I think that maybe Mailroom might be a better example. Let's check what the version is there. Yeah, okay, so app version is the component version. For Mailroom, it's set to 006. Components. So then for Rails.
Now, one of the reasons that we do this is, for example, you can have Mailroom built against a different Ruby version. So we don't necessarily want to tag the wrong thing.
Right. Right, so then, let's see. I guess that it's basically, oh shoot, okay, that does make it a little more difficult. Yeah, because then it's basically,
the container registry falls into that same boat where we're specifying version 2.10.1 right now on that particular stable branch.
What is that component called? Operator?
No, it's the, if you go up to GitLab charts registry, chart.yaml.
Where am I blind? GitLab charge, at least on the 4.3 stable branches, no registry. Let's see if it's on master. Okay, I'm probably looking at the wrong directory.
So basically, in the repository on that branch, it's under charts registry.
Okay, so it's not charge. Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry.
Correct, because it's the registry itself is not actually a direct component of the GitLab suite. It's a side-by-side service.
Let's see. Oops. Okay, so then it's basically, we need to know all the components, the new versions, and then we need some sort of mapping of saying, oh, hey, this component goes to this YAML file, and then update that app version to blah. Kind of similar to what we do in Omnibus, I suppose.
Yes, it's very similar in that regard. Obviously, noting the difference that this chart is explicitly designed to directly consume whatever the CNG outputs. So if we're going to, at any point, start changing the pattern on how the CNG tags its images,
right,
that's when we can make changes to how the chart consumes those images. But until that point, whatever the output is from the CNG is what the chart has to use.
Right. Yeah, quickly update versions. Oops. Version updater. Version update version subcharge. Okay, so it's starting to slowly come together. Version fetcher. Oops. Let's see, so where do we pull that info from? GitLab shell, version from env, GitLab shell version. Projects, repo. Oh, I'm just quickly going through the code, making sure I don't have any. Okay, so it seems we pull these sort of component versions from the capitalized version files from the GitLab Rails repo. And then we, let's see, read from env. Is that just a file or? And apparently we support passing in the versions via environment variables to, oof, okay. Okay, well, I think let me at least write that down. In repo, we use, what's this thing called? Version fetcher. gv component versions from the GitLab Rails. All right. Yeah, I think it's just starting to look like a case where the process itself is fairly straightforward, but the code makes it a little more appear more complicated than it actually is.
Yeah, because
okay.
we had to handle a bunch of special cases for developmental testing and things like this.
Yeah, and I think at least some of the stuff that's in release tools was added like 2-3 years ago, so it looks a bit like it may have been sort of not so much a prototype, but sort of like a proof of concept or whatever you like to call it. And we say, okay, we'll improve it one day, but the day didn't come.
Right.
And I think if I look at this code, probably a lot of it I might not even need to port over. So this version fetching logic seems to have support for being able to override component versions using an environment variable. That is something that really still doesn't really support. I mean,
It probably won't be
technically,
needed.
right? Technically, you could do it where you specify the environment variable as a CI environment variable. But I think we can just leave that out for now. The rest just appears to be some duplication. Okay, well, I think I know enough for now. That answers most of my, well, basically all the questions I can think of right now. So what I'll do, I'll just place my notes in the issue and then link to the recording for those that want to watch it back later. Yeah, that's all for me. Skybike, do you have any questions or whatever?
I do not know.
Yeah, it's pretty much straightforward. And if you really look at the history of the version and version fetchers, this was literally a rip and paste from another repository that had this pattern already in place. Because we're like, we need to be able to handle this. It already exists. Let's customize it from that point. And then probably we just have this slowly happen over time. And now we need to just kind of go like that.
Yeah, and it seems like some of the code, it's just some stuff duplicated, which makes it look like there's more going on than there actually is. But yeah, this clears things up a lot. So yeah, thanks a lot.
I wouldn't call this code dry at all, but if it works.
I mean, that's the like. I'm not going to say it's bad code. It's not. It's just it looks like basically first version, not like a final thing. But it's just the same with release tools. Like all of our release code that operates on the local clone, it started off one thing, and then over time we just bolted stuff on top. And I always said to you, like, yeah, we'll clean this up later. We're not going to do this now. And that's what I'm doing now. And yeah, it's a lot of similar things. But anyway, that's all. So thanks a lot. Let me stop the recording. And